Hello, besties. Welcome to another episode of Your New B.F.F. I'm your host, Sophie, and in this podcast, we chit chat all about positivity, realness, and the journey to your highest self. After this episode, I want you to leave feeling inspired and high vibe. So let's tune in because I'm so excited you're here with me today. Hello, besties. Welcome back to episode 37, the next episode of Your New BFF. I am so excited that you guys have tuned in today. I'm super excited about today's episode. It is a little bit late, but I promise it was worth the wait. I did try filming this video last week, and if you guys follow me over on Instagram, I had a TLM, which I explained in one of the episodes. We call it here the little moment, TLM, which is our little moment where we just let ourselves feel all the feelings, overwhelmed, stress, basically just the feelings that we just are ready to get out of our nervous system, out of our body, so that we can just get realigned and back into our manifestation journey. I actually did record the entire episode last week. And as I was editing it, when I was about like 80% done editing it, I was just not feeling it, you guys. Like, I don't know, the energy behind that video, I felt like I was like sitting kind of tense. And I feel like I was just overthinking it. And I realized I didn't really clear the space and get myself in the right mindset. If you guys don't already know, I had basically started this podcast, and like the first 30 episodes, I did not post on YouTube. Like 30 episodes were just strictly on the podcast. So I was not used to just like sitting in front of the camera and filming the podcast. So this is still like a little bit new to me. And I think in the last episode, or the last time the first time I tried filming it, I think I just got into my head and it was just like not the vibe. And I was like, you know what? I am just going to start in fresh. There was a couple things that I did it that I had forgotten to record anyways. So I was like, you know what? This is a sign from the universe. These are all lessons. And I feel like it was just meant to happen because it worked out perfectly with the episode that I wanted to bring you guys today. So I feel like the universe was definitely giving me a lesson because this episode today, I want to talk to you guys about the inner critic. The inner critic. The inner critic, like, she's a little bitch, okay? This is like the voice in our head, the little Jiminy Cricket that if we are not on top of it, it will bully the shit out of us. But before we jump right in, if you guys are new here, thank you for being here. We start each episode with a quote that's going to lead us into today's chit chat. Today's quote is by Buddha. All that we are is a result of what we have thought. And if you guys are new to the podcast, welcome. In this space, we talk all things the manifestation journey and becoming our most authentic selves in the process. So if you love all things up leveling, manifestation, law of attraction, spirituality, and just becoming the best version of yourself, and you're addicted to growth and just being the best you, hit subscribe and hit a like so I know more of what you guys want to see of. And thank you again for being here and for your support. So the inner critic, it's that voice in our head that if you do not take the driver's seat and take control, it will literally bully you and leave you in a state of paralysis and not being able to continue and follow your goals, because it can be this debilitating. And the inner critic is very different than the inner guide, which is kind of like what came up for me when I had first filmed this episode and I was in the editing process and I was just not feeling it. I was like, oh my God, am I just being hard on myself? Is this just my inner critic telling me that my video is not good enough, to being overthinking, and basically, like, is it just talking crap at me? And in that moment, I really had to sit for a second and reflect. But I knew that in that moment, it was my inner guide and it was more of like an intuitive thought. So sometimes that does happen, but you will know that it is the inner critic. It is characterized by very negative and self-critical beliefs, statements, or thoughts about our abilities, our worth, and our adequacy. And it can really be our very own worst bully and just keep us in this state of just stuck and not being able to kind of like shake it off and get realigned. And the inner critic, it's basically this whole thing, this whole voice in our head. I call it the Jiminy Cricket, this voice in our head that has been created by our own self judgments about ourselves. And the big thing about the inner critic is that it highlights and makes us feel low self esteem. So, needless to say, the inner critic is super fucking important for in the manifestation journey because essentially it's blocking our blessings. We cannot receive blessings if we are in a state of resentment. And on top of it, the resentment to ourselves. So if we are just basically taking the passenger seat of our own minds and letting this inner critic take the driver's seat, take hold and take control of our entire mindset, what we say to ourselves, what we're thinking to ourselves, this is going to affect our emotions, how we're feeling, and basically our actions, our entire mindset in the manifestation process. The consistency and the constant bullying to ourselves and the constant inner critic, if you are sitting in the passenger side and just letting this take control of the driver's seat going in the fast lane, you are going to notice that the more that this persists, the more consistent these thoughts are of your inner critic, you are going to start manifesting these emotions, even some physical symptoms. The persistency of the inner critic in the driver's seat is going to cause anxiety, depression, feelings of no purpose, inadequacy, very low self esteem, not feeling worthy, stressed, short of breath, and it can even manifest into some physical symptoms. So this will just continue. So the more that these things are manifesting, the more it's imprinting this belief of like, this is how it must be. And the more the inner critic will continue to talk to us. So it is quite literally one of the quickest downward spirals that we can go on the manifestation journey. And if you guys have listened to these episodes before, I talk about the spiral almost in every episode because it really is one of the main components of the manifestation journey. Basically, it's a frequency of emotions, at the top being the best emotions that are going to be supporting us and keeping us in alignment in our journey. And at the bottom of the scale, it's the emotions that are keeping us away and deterring us and keeping us in a low vibrational state, which is going to keep us out of alignment and far from our manifestations. The longer the inner critic stays in the driver's seat, the more debilitating it becomes. You might not even feel the energy to make the shifts necessary. It might be manifesting in no energy actually physically, like you're not feeling the energy or the motivation to go up and walk, to take hot girl walks, to go to the gym, to get your work done. You're not feeling inspiration. Maybe you're not feeling creativity. These are all signs that maybe your inner critic, even without noticing, is taking the driver's seat. And a lot of times, these things are going unconsciously. We might not even realize how far the inner critic has gone because we're just at this point we're just so used to living with it. We're just so used to living with this bully in our head. So it's very important to be mindful to kind of awaken from this state. If you're not feeling sure if it's like your inner critic or your inner guide, listen to your intuition. Your inner guide is intuitive, it talks to you out of love, and it's going to feel in alignment and in a state of flow. Versus the inner critic, you're going to feel pressure, you're going to feel stressed, overwhelmed, overthinking, overanalyzing, all these different feelings on the scale that might not be in the way top of the scale. Because the inner critic highly focuses on self judgment, shame, and thoughts and feelings of not being adequate enough, of not being worthy. The continuous cycle of this inner critic and not feeling good enough, it can become imprinted to the point that it becomes your limiting beliefs. And in the last episode, you guys, we were talking about limiting beliefs and how they become imprinted. And this episode, I feel like, goes really hand in hand with that, because the inner critic is constantly bullying you and is constantly telling you all these things about you that are not true. But the thing is that if we don't take the driver's seat, it's going to continue, and it's going to continue on this perpetuous cycle. And those things we're going to start believing about ourselves, even though that they are not true. And that's when it becomes limited beliefs. And that's when they become very cemented, that it's almost harder for us to kind of switch those beliefs, because we've been thinking those things about ourselves for so long. So the inner critic is definitely something that can be very sneaky. And like I said, it's a big bad bully. This is blocking our manifestations. We are emitting the frequency of I am not worthy to the universe. The universe cannot deliver to us our blessings if we are not feeling worthy, if we are not feeling ready to receive, if we are not feeling the same frequency of our desire. It's on the contrary. The more that we're feeling those feelings, the more experiences of inadequacy, the more experiences of low self esteem we are going to call to ourselves. Basically, acting against yourself and being your own worst enemy. And in the manifestation process, you need to be your very own best friend. If you are not talking to yourself how you talk to your bestie, what are you doing? You need to be your own biggest supporter and your own biggest support system. You cannot feel gratitude if you are constantly kicking yourself down, if you are constantly making yourself feel like you're not worthy enough, and if you're constantly in this toxic relationship with yourself. Learning to manage your inner critic is going to take self compassion, self awareness, and patience. It's a process of changing the way that you've always been talking to yourself. So, depending on how long you guys have been telling yourselves these same things, it might take some time, longer than others, to change this complete whole new mindset and way of thinking. Because if you've been thinking that same way for 20, 25, 30 years, imagine how ingrained and how much you think that is true, even though it's not. As we start becoming more mindful of the inner critic, it definitely can bring up some emotions, and it can sometimes make us feel maybe like a little bit bad about how we've been talking to ourselves, right? Because when you start bringing up this self awareness, you're like, oh my God, I have been self sabotaging my journey. Maybe you awaken to things that you've been telling yourselves for a long time that you didn't recognize before. And this is all a part of the journey. This is all about awakening and up leveling, right? Important, like I said, to practice self compassion, besties, because there are times where, at least for me, I can definitely say I can be hard on myself, especially if I slip back or if I catch myself like, what am I doing? I am not practicing what I preach, right? One of the big takeaways is that this is a practice. This is not an overnight thing. We are changing our entire mindset and the way that we have been talking to ourselves for such a long time. It didn't happen overnight, so it's not going to happen overnight to now change. We are now in the driver's seat. We are now no longer letting the inner critic take control of our thoughts and actions and of our entire well being. This is when that inner critic relationship with self becomes toxic, when we're just letting it take the driver's seat and we are not in control of ourselves and it's taking over our well being. So, by being mindful and taking that step into wanting to change your mindset, knowing that by challenging this inner critic, bestie, this is going to realign you on your path to your manifestation. You can definitely catch yourself if your inner critic is acting out of boundaries. If number one, your inner critic is talking to you in a way that you would not talk to your bestest friend. Number two, you are having these thoughts whether you want to or not. They're just flooding in, even though you're like, I don't want to be thinking this, it's coming into your mind. You are feeling like a victim to your thoughts or powerless. This is a sign to take action on your inner critic and start putting up some boundaries with yourself. It is nothing to be ashamed of. This is part of the manifestation journey. And I believe the inner critic is something that never fully goes away. It's a part of our shadow selves. And the divine feminine is made up of light and shadow. As manifestors, we are all here to transmute our energy, learn from our intuitive downloads, whether they're good or bad, whether it's light or shadows. Transmuting energy is when you convert one form of energy, like our shadow energy, into light form energy. So, managing our inner critic and bringing it to our attention and doing the inner work on this is definitely part of our shadow work in our manifestation process. And for me in this journey, the goal of shadow work is not to eliminate these parts of ourselves, but to integrate it into our conscious awareness so we can coexist with this energy. This means basically embracing and accepting all the parts of ourselves, the parts that we do like, and the parts that are a little bit more challenging for us. What makes up the divine feminine, and do not be ashamed of shadow work. Remember, those feelings of shame, of fear, of not facing it, these are all on the bottom end of the spiral. And I promise you guys, by challenging your shadows and by challenging your inner critic, there is light on the other side. You are strengthening your powers by doing the shadow work and facing these inner critics and taking the driver's seat. The end result will just be you becoming a more powerful manifester, learning how to transmute energy, and being more in alignment and on track to your desires. The shadow parts of ourselves are meant to be transformed. So let's cipher this energy into magic. Connect with your shadows in a compassionate, constructive way. Be patient with yourselves. Like I said, you guys, this is all part of the journey. And by taking the steps and challenging your shadows, you are already taking the inspired action and doing the rituals in transforming your inner self. And when you transform your inner self, your outer self and your outer experiences are just going to be a reflection of that. Talk to yourself like the person that you look up to. Talk to yourself like the person that you have on that vision board. I always go back to the vision board because when you look at that, you should feel inspired, bestie. Like, think of your best next level self and how would you speak with her? How would you tell her? How happy would you be of her? How proud would you be of them, right? So this is the way that we want to transform our inner talk. And it's going to take time if we've been talking to ourselves the same way for so long. So be patient with yourselves and do not self-deprecate, as you do not want to go further down into the spiral. And if you guys have made it to the end of this video, I wanted to share a special message with you. As I was getting this episode ready, I had seen 333 so much as I was getting this episode ready for you guys. And my intuition told me to share this on the podcast. I just felt like it was a message for the collective. So it was about our guardian angels and about our mind, body, and spirits. So don't forget to take care of all three aspects of yourselves: your mindset, be active with your body, eat nourishing foods, and practice your rituals. Your soul needs it. Do the things that make you happy. Tap into your intuition and to your creativity. This will just encourage you to feel better about yourself, in turn, thinking better to yourself and saying nicer things to yourself. Thank you guys so much for tuning into today's podcast episode. And if you're new here, I end each episode with 3 affirmations. When you identify your inner critic come up, I encourage you to swap that thought with one of these affirmations. I have everything I need to manifest my desires. I am enough right here, right now. I am stepping into the dream version of myself. Besties, thank you so much for being here today. Don't forget, if you haven't already, to subscribe and like and share this episode. I can't wait to see you guys on the next one. Bye. Thank you for tuning in to today's episode of YN B.F.F. If you love what you heard, please support by following our podcast and leaving a stellar review. You can also follow my socials posted in the show notes. I am so excited to catch you in the next episode, and until then, stay feeling high, blessed, and divine, besties. Bye!